be 2.2b. So the objective is I can solve two-step equations with fractions. And you guys already know how to do this, but I'm going to show you a different method that you might like better instead of the normal way. So first I'm going to do it the way we were used to doing it. So I'm going to call this method number 1. And so for the first example, let's do 7/6 times d plus 4/3 equals -1/3. So the way we would have done this before is we would have drawn our equation on the equal sign. We're trying to get the variable by itself, so we're trying to get the d alone. We want to do the opposite of what's being done to the variable, so the first thing we would do would be we would subtract 4/3 from both sides. 4/3 minus 4/3 is 0, so all I have left on the left side is 7/6 times d, and then -1/3 plus -4/3 would be -5/3. And then we would want to get the d by itself. The opposite of multiplying by 7/6 is dividing by 7/6, but we know that when we divide fractions, we flip and multiply. So I'm going to multiply by the reciprocal on both sides. Here I can cross cancel. 6 goes in here one time and in here one time. 7 goes in here one time and in here one time. So I'm left with 1d, or just d, equals 3 goes in here once, 3 goes in here twice, so I have -5 times 2, which is -10. 1 times 7 is 7, or I could say 7 goes into 10 one time with 3 left over. So my answer is either -10/7 or -1 3/7. I'm going to show you a different way to do this same problem that some of you might like better, that might be a little bit easier for you when you're dealing with fractions. So we're going to do the same problem. We're going to call this method number 2. And it's going to be the same example, so I'm going to write example 1 again. 7/6 times d plus 4/3 equals -1/3. And what we're going to do is we're going to get rid of the fraction at the beginning, and so we won't have any fractions to deal with while we solve the equation. So I'm going to multiply the whole equation by the lowest common denominator. So in this case, the lowest common denominator would be 6, because 6 and 3 will both go evenly into 6. So I'm going to multiply every single term on both sides of the equal sign by 6. So I have to do 7/6 times 6, which would be really 6/1. I can cross cancel, so I get 7. So this is now 7d plus 4/3 times 6/1. 3 goes in here one time, 3 goes in here twice. 4 times 2 is 8, so plus 8 equals -1/3 times 6. 3 goes in here once, 3 goes in here twice is -2. So now my equation is 7d plus 8 equals -2. And I can do this because I multiplied it on both sides of the equation, which is what our rule is. Whatever I do to one side, I have to do to the other. But now I don't have any fractions to deal with. So I multiply by the lowest common denominator, and now I have no fractions to deal with while I solve my equation. I'm going to draw my line down the equal sign. Subtract 8 from both sides. So I get 7d. This becomes 0, equals -10. And then divide by 7. So I have d equals -10/7, or -1 3/10. So I get the same thing that I got when I did the problem the first time. I like this method because then I don't have to deal with the fractions while I'm solving the equation. And that makes my arithmetic, like my adding, subtracting, multiplying, and dividing, a little bit easier. Let's do another example using this method. So I'm going to call this example 2. And let's do 5 1/2 minus u equals 9/4. So I'm still going to start my problems the same way I always have, and I'm going to change the sign in the one behind first. And then I should probably also add a coefficient here. Instead of just a negative, it would make more sense to have a -1u. And then I'm going to do what I did on the first problem, and I'm going to multiply by the lowest common denominator. So here I have halves, here I have fourths, so the common denominator would be 4. So I'm going to multiply this side of the equation by 4 and this side of the equation by 4. I wrote it out a little differently than I did on this first example, but either way I'm multiplying every single term by a 4. So 5 1/2 times 4, I'd have to make it improper. So 5 times 2 is 10, plus 1 is 11. So I have 11 over 2 times 4 over 1. 2 goes in here one time and in here twice. So I get 22 over 1, or just 22. So I have 22 plus negative 1 times 4 is negative 4u. And then 9/4 times 4 over 1. 4 goes in here one time and in here one time. So I just have a 9. So now my fractions are gone. So now when I solve the equation, I'm going to subtract 22 from both sides. So I have negative 4u, because this is 0. Negative 4u equals 9 minus 22 is negative 13. Then I'll divide by negative 4 on both sides. And then that becomes 1. So I have 1u equals 13 divided by 4 is either positive 13 over 4, or 4 goes into 13 3 times, which would be 12, so there's 1 left over. So either 13 over 4 or 3 1/4. And it's positive because a negative divided by a negative is positive. You can leave it improper or as a mixed number.